Welcome to Rainy Day Rabbit Holes, where we take the history of the West off the rails.
If you like your history unhinged, you are in the right place.
I'm Shay.
And I'm Jody. Let's fall down the rabbit hole.
Sometimes, some acts are so vile, so evil, that they leave their terrible energy behind. And perhaps the victims of those terrible acts can tap into that energy, reaching out across the veil, unwilling to rest. In this special episode swap, we're sharing a haunted story from our friend Ani Khajadourian, host of Audibly Haunted. Ani has a rare gift for weaving stories that draw you in like the flicker of firelight on a dark night. Tonight, she brings you a chilling tale about the restless spirits that linger in the shadow of one of America's most horrifying crimes, the ghost said to haunt family annihilator Chris Watts. Settle in, take a deep breath, and prepare for a haunting you won't soon forget. When you're done, make sure to follow Audibly Haunted wherever you get your podcasts, and follow Ani on Instagram at Audibly Haunted for more beautifully eerie stories to keep you up at night.
They say the ghosts from our past may come back to haunt us. It could be a photo of you from middle school wearing, let's say, a brown Adidas track jacket, brown Dickies, a black button-up, and a hot pink striped necktie that rivaled Avril Lavigne, and sporting a bad haircut. And this photo finds its way to the surface. This may or may not be my personal ghost. It could be an ex from your younger days that you wronged, now finding their way into your life, making it miserable. Or how about this? Maybe it's the ghosts of your entire family coming back to haunt you after you murdered them, stuffed them in oil tanks, and left their bodies to boil under the hot May sun. Does that sound familiar? This week, we are taking a turn down the road of true crime that found its way into the paranormal. Brace yourselves for the deep dive into the Watts family murder case. This case had the entire nation on the edges of their seats. A seemingly normal suburban family finds themselves in the middle of a missing persons case. A husband pleads with anyone listening to help bring back his wife and two young daughters. The world followed every new development with this story. Each and every person found themselves asking the same question. Can we really trust or even believe this husband? Chris Watts, on the outside, seemed like a devoted father, desperate for his family's return, but something far more sinister hid within Chris's shadow. Eventually, the world learned that blood was all over Chris's hands, and he was truly to blame for the murder of his entire family. Here is where the paranormal comes in. In recently released body cam footage from the investigation of the Watts family home, voices, children's voices, can be heard recorded on the body cam footage. Even Chris himself has shared from a jail cell interview that the spirits of his daughters and wife haunt him in prison. Everyone has ghosts that come back to haunt them. Just some ghosts are larger than others. So, let's dive into that. Welcome to Audibly Haunted. I'm your host, Ani Khajadourian. So, let me break down this story for those not familiar with this case. It was just another Monday morning in the quiet town of Frederick, Colorado, until 34-year-old Shannon Watts and her 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste, were reported missing. Shannon had returned home from a business trip in the early hours of August 13th, 2018. Her friend, alarmed by missed appointments and unanswered messages, contacted the authorities. At first glance, her husband, Chris Watts, seemed like the heartbroken spouse. He gave interviews on local news, pleaded for his family's return, and insisted he had no idea where they had gone. But something was off. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera showed Shannon arrived home, but it never showed her leaving. And for Chris, he was seen backing his trunk into the garage in the early morning hours. Something he had never normally done. Under growing suspicion and facing a failed polygraph test, Chris finally confessed, but not to the full truth. His initial story was that Shannon had killed her daughters after he asked for a separation, and in a fit of rage, he killed her in response. But investigators weren't buying it, and neither was the public. Eventually, Chris admitted to everything. He had strangled Shannon after an argument, then driven her lifeless body, along with his 2 daughters who were still alive, to a remote oil field where he worked. There, in a horrifying sequence of events, he smothered Celeste with her favorite blanket while Bella watched. Then, he did the same to Bella. Despite her tearful pleas, "Daddy, no." He stuffed their small bodies in a separate oil tank and buried Shannon in a shallow grave nearby. The motive? As chilling as it was ordinary. Chris had been having an affair with a coworker and wanted to start over, free from his marriage, his responsibilities, and his children. Instead of seeking a divorce, he chose to erase his entire family. What shocked the world even more was the image Chris had so carefully curated online. Social media showing a happy family, smiling photos, family vacations, pregnancy announcements. But behind the camera, there were financial issues, marital strain, and a man slowly unraveling. Oh yeah, and did I mention Shannon was also pregnant at the time of the murder? The murder sent shockwaves across the country, leaving many to question how someone could lead such a double life, and how evil could hide behind such an ordinary face. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And rightfully so. He'll spend the rest of his life in a maximum security prison. But the scars of what he did remain, etched in the community and in the memory of those who followed the case. The Watts family murders became a grim reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't strangers hiding in the shadows, but they are the ones who are cozily sleeping in the bed next to you. Now that we are all thoroughly disgusted on the true crime side of things, here is where the story begins to shift. True crime takes a bit of a back seat and makes way for the fright of the paranormal. As officers enter the Watts family home on August 13th, 2018, responding to the missing persons call, their body cameras begin recording more than just the sterile, eerily touched living room and home. Viewers of the publicly released footage have pointed out strange, unexplained occurrences that seem to unfold in real time. In the upstairs hallway, a child's giggle can be faintly heard. This sends chills up your body, as there were no kids around, and Bella and Celeste are already dead by this point. The officers don't seem to react at the time, but those watching later can't shake the chill. In the basement, one officer's camera appears to glitch, flickering rapidly before returning to normal, as if something unseen had passed directly in front of the lens. In one body cam clip, officers are seen standing completely still in the closet doorway of one of the little girls' rooms, talking to each other on how they are creeped out and both expressing they have heard weird noises, when suddenly one of the toy cars in the closet begins to go off. Throughout the footage, figures can be seen lurking just out of sight. In one shot, as the officer faces the master bedroom, the corner of the shot catches one of the kids' rooms, and the figure of a small child can be seen peeking around the edge. But perhaps the most disturbing moment came when the officers stood alone in the master bedroom. From downstairs, a female voice, faint but clear, whispers, "I'm with Cece, and this is our home." There was no one else on the main floor at the time, but the house had already been searched. Paranormal investigators have since combed through the footage frame by frame, convinced that the spirit of Shannon and her daughters were trying to communicate from beyond. In the days following the initial search, friends and family who entered the house reported a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. What some described as an unnatural stillness. One close friend of Shannon's claimed that her phone suddenly died when she stepped into the girl's room, despite being fully charged moments earlier. Others reported hearing soft knocking from inside the walls and catching brief glimpses of shadows moving across doorways, only to find nobody there. Even seasoned officers admitted off camera that the home felt off, like it was holding its breath. Whether these experiences were driven by grief, guilt, or something beyond our understanding, one thing became clear. The Watts home wasn't just a crime scene. It had been a place where the energy of a shattered family still lingered, echoing through every quiet hallway and flickering light. The haunting for this case did not stop and stay in the Watts home. It seems that the spirits of his wife and children did not forgive Chris for what he did and seemed to be making sure he is never peaceful in life again. Inside his stark, windowless prison cell at the Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Chris Watts lives in silence, but not in solitude. Guards say he can barely speak, rarely sleeps, and avoids eye contact with anyone. But in the dead of night, sometimes they say he wakes up screaming. He's confessed to prison chaplains that he feels a dark presence around him, especially at night. Some believe it's guilt. Others think it's something more. He claims to hear the soft padding of tiny footsteps across the cold concrete floor and whispers of little voices calling, "Daddy?" followed by silence thick enough to suffocate. According to insiders, Chris has told fellow inmates that he sometimes sees Shannon's silhouette standing in the corner of his cell, just watching, her arms crossed, her eyes full of betrayal. Other times, it's Bella and Celeste who appear at the foot of his bed, their pajamas stained with oil and their faces frozen in the last moments of terror. Whether these are hallucinations, a tortured conscience, or something so truly supernatural, no one can say for sure. But one thing is certain. Chris Watts may have taken their lives to escape his own, but there's no escaping them now. In that cramped, gray cell, haunted by the family he destroyed, Chris Watts serves a sentence far longer than life. One that reaches into the dark corners of his soul night after endless night. The story of the Watts family. It began like so many others. Love, marriage, children, a picture-perfect life captured on social media. But behind that carefully crafted facade was a crumbling foundation. One that would eventually collapse under the weight of betrayal, selfishness, and unthinkable violence. Chris Watts didn't just murder his wife and children. He tried to erase them. Yet, in doing so, he made them eternal. Their names, faces, their final moments. They now live on in the public consciousness, in courtroom documents, documentaries, and perhaps in quiet, unexplainable moments caught on camera, something more. As the investigation closed, the true crime story of the Watts family should have ended. But something lingered. Whispers in the hallway, giggles in the silence, cold drafts with no source. What began as a brutal act of domestic violence became something else entirely. A haunting, both literal and emotional. The family destroyed not just by murder, but by the enduring weight of what was lost. And maybe that's the most terrifying truth of all. Some crimes don't just leave behind questions. They leave behind screaming echoes. This has been Audibly Haunted, and I'm your host, Ani Khajadourian. You can find Audibly Haunted wherever you get your podcasts. Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, you name it. So give it a listen and drop a rating or a review, and tell all your friends. And remember, you can always find Audibly Haunted on Instagram at Audibly Haunted. And if you have a ghost story that you would like to share, I would love to hear it. You can always reach out to me at audiblyhaunted@gmail.com or send me a message on Instagram. I would love to hear from all of you. And I'll see you all next week.